The girl no one saw. The city moved like a machine, loud, relentless, and blind. The morning rush had begun. Cars honked. People shouted into cell phones. The wind sliced through layers of clothing like tiny knives. And there, lost in it all, was a little girl whose presence was so quiet, it was almost invisible. Her name was Zaria. She was 5 years old, wearing a faded coat at least 2 sizes too small. The sleeves stopped just past her elbows, exposing arms that trembled from the cold. Her shoes, once white, were soaked with slush, the laces trailing behind her like forgotten ribbons. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Her fingers had long stopped aching from hunger. Now, they were simply numb. Zaria walked with slow, shuffling steps down the icy sidewalk, her eyes half closed, her head heavy. People brushed past her, some annoyed, some indifferent, but no one stopped. Not a single adult asked why a child was wandering alone in freezing weather. She passed a cafe with warm yellow lights. Inside, people laughed over steaming cups of coffee. Zaria pressed her hand against the glass for a second, then pulled away. Her skin left behind a small smudge. No one noticed. Outside Mercy General Hospital, a woman in a nurse's uniform lit a cigarette. She squinted at the wind, cursing softly as she stepped away from the breeze. Her gaze passed over Zaria once, just once, but moved on. Zaria made it to the hospital's front entrance. Her legs gave out. She collapsed, right there on the sidewalk. Not a scream, not a cry, just a quiet fall, like a small leaf drifting from a dying tree. She curled into herself, her thin arms wrapping around her knees. The red emergency sign above the door blinked steadily, casting an eerie glow on her small form. A doctor walked past her, clipboard in hand, white coat fluttering. He looked down, then up again, and kept walking. Too busy. Too many patients. Too many problems. One more lost child wasn't his concern. Minutes passed. Then, a security guard noticed. Then another. She breathing? The first asked, kneeling down. Yeah, the second said, glancing nervously at the entrance. Barely. But what are we supposed to do? She's not bleeding. They lifted her gently, like someone carrying something fragile and forgotten. But instead of rushing her to a doctor, they brought her to the waiting room. A cold plastic bench in the far corner. No blanket, no water, just waiting. Hours ticked by. The hospital buzzed with energy, people coming in with broken bones, coughing fits, allergic reactions. Every minute, names were called over the loudspeaker. Nurses scribbled notes, phones rang. Yet in the corner, Zaria sat like a ghost. Still silent, still unnoticed, until a civil rights attorney named Danielle Miles sat down across the room. Danielle wasn't supposed to be there long. Her father had slipped on some ice earlier and needed an X-ray. While he filled out paperwork, she scrolled through emails on her phone, preparing for a deposition later that day. Then she heard it. Another no ID. Looks like another transient kid. The voice came from a Child Protective Services agent. Danielle glanced up and followed their gaze. That's when she saw Zaria for the first time. It wasn't just the small frame or the dirt-streaked cheeks that caught her attention. It was the stillness, the kind of stillness that meant something was very wrong. Danielle stood up. She walked over to the nurse's desk. Her voice was firm, calm. The little girl in the corner. Has she been examined by a physician? She's being processed, the nurse said, barely glancing up. CPS is handling it. Danielle didn't move. I'd like to see her intake form. You're not family. The nurse replied quickly. You can't access that. Danielle reached into her bag and pulled out her business card. I'm a civil rights attorney, and I'm invoking Article 10, Subsection 5, Emergency Third-Party Guardianship, unless you prefer a lawsuit this afternoon. The nurse blinked. You're serious. Danielle's tone didn't change. Deadly. 15 minutes later, She had temporary custody for 72 hours. The CPS officers looked annoyed, but they couldn't stop her. The law was on her side. Danielle walked to the vending machine and bought a hot chocolate with extra marshmallows. Then she stopped at the gift shop and picked up a small notepad and a box of crayons. When she returned, she didn't force Zaria to talk. She simply sat beside her on the cold plastic bench and placed the items down. A peace offering. After a long pause, Zaria picked up a crayon. She didn't say a word, but she began to draw. That was enough. Danielle knew. Something deep had happened to this little girl. Something that no file, no diagnosis, no report could explain. And she also knew. This was just the beginning. The picture that spoke louder than words. Zaria didn't say a single word that night, but she didn't have to. The drawing she made on that notepad told Danielle more than any 5-year-old ever should have to say. The first drawing was simple. 3 stick figures standing together under a crooked sun. One tall, one short, and one in the middle with curly hair labeled in uneven, shaky letters. Mara. Danielle stared at the name. It wasn't random. It was a memory. A clue. The next day, while Zaria slept on a makeshift cot in Danielle's guest room, curled up beside a tall stuffed giraffe, Danielle sat at her dining table with files, law books, and her laptop spread out in front of her like a war map. She was trained to build cases on facts, but this wasn't a courtroom yet. This was a mystery, one with a name and no last name, no address, no birth record. Just Mara, and a child who had slipped through the cracks of every system meant to protect her. Danielle started digging. She searched for every Mara listed in child welfare reports within the last 6 years, then narrowed it to women whose children had been placed in foster care. Then again to those who had lived near the same neighborhood where Zaria had been found. The list shrank to 7, then 4. One case stood out. Mara Fields. Committed to Street Olivian Psychiatric Center 4 years ago. Diagnosis: paranoid schizophrenia, neglectful behavior, emotionally unstable. There were no criminal charges, no prior psychiatric history, but her child had been removed within 48 hours of the evaluation. Danielle's eyes narrowed. The phrasing in the case file felt off. Too neat, too convenient. She printed the documents and added them to a fresh folder labeled Zary Kasea. The next morning, Danielle found Zaria sitting on the living room rug, silently coloring. The giraffe sat next to her, as always. A line of drawings had begun to form beside her, each one more detailed than the last. Today's picture had a small square building in the background. It had bars on the windows. Danielle knelt beside her. Zaria, is this where Mara is? Zaria didn't answer, but she picked up a black crayon and carefully colored in the barred windows. Danielle nodded. That was all she needed. That afternoon, Danielle drove to Street Olivian. The building sat like a fortress. Red brick walls, manicured lawns, guarded gates. Inside, it smelled like antiseptic and quiet despair. I'm here to see patient Mara Fields, she told the receptionist, presenting her credentials and a court order for temporary case review. The woman behind the desk gave her a tight, rehearsed smile. I'm sorry. That's not possible. Her status is restricted. Family-only access. Danielle leaned in slightly. She has no family listed. But she has a daughter who just collapsed outside a hospital after being homeless for God knows how long. Would you prefer I get a court subpoena? The receptionist stiffened, then picked up a phone. 20 minutes later, Danielle was led to a side room where a thin, pale woman sat staring blankly out a window. Her hair had been cut short, unevenly. Her hospital gown hung off her bony shoulders. But there was something fierce in her eyes when Danielle said the name. Zaria. Mara blinked. Then slowly, her lips trembled. She remembers me. She whispered, her voice brittle like old glass. Danielle reached into her bag and pulled out one of the drawings, the one with the 3 stick figures, and the name Mara. Mara's hands shook as she took the paper. Her fingers traced the lines as if they were sacred. "She still knows me," she said again, softer this time. They told me she wouldn't. They told me she was better off." Danielle knelt beside her. "Mara, what happened? Why were you brought here?" Mara stared at the window again. Her voice was barely audible. "I tried to report something. At the community clinic, I told them someone was watching my apartment, moving my daughter's toys when I left. I wasn't imagining it. I know I wasn't. But the counselor said I sounded paranoid. Next thing I knew, child services came. Said I was unfit. They took her. The next day, I was in here." Danielle's legal instincts fired. No hearing. No follow-up. Just an evaluation and an order. "Who evaluated you?" she asked. Mara turned slowly. "Dr. Ellen Crane." Danielle's stomach turned. That name has shown up in 3 of the other flagged cases. It was no longer a coincidence. Back home, Danielle paced the kitchen as her father, Mr. Miles, stirred soup on the stove. "She's sane, Daddy," Danielle said. And they locked her away like she was disposable. Like her child didn't matter. Mr. Miles set down the ladle and looked at his daughter. "You know why that is," he said quietly. Danielle stopped pacing. "It's not just one bad doctor," she said slowly. "It's a pattern." She looked over at Zaria, who was now curled up on the couch under a blanket, the giraffe tucked into her arms. "They erased Mara, tried to erase Zaria. If I hadn't been at the hospital that night." She couldn't even finish the sentence. The next few days blurred into a flurry of legal filings, record pulls, and whispered conversations with contacts in the family court system. Danielle called in every favor she had. Then something strange happened. Files disappeared from public access. One of the case numbers was wiped from the database completely. And then, a plain manila envelope was slipped under her office door. Inside was a single piece of paper. 2 words, in all caps. "Leave it." Danielle stared at the words. Cold crept up her spine. But her resolve hardened. The next morning, Danielle filed for a full writ of habeas corpus, a demand that the court review Mara's psychiatric hold and determine its lawfulness. Then she made a call to the media. Not the big networks. Not yet. She called Marcus Chen, a small-time but ruthless investigative reporter she had worked with in the past. "This isn't just a wrongful commitment," she told him. "It's a system built to tear apart families. Poor families. Black families. You want your big story, Marcus. This is it." His answer was immediate. "I'm in." That night, Danielle sat with Zaria on the couch. She handed the girl a brand new notepad. "Would you like to draw something for Mara?" she asked gently. Zaria didn't answer with words. She opened the notepad, picked up a purple crayon, and drew the same 3 figures, this time holding hands. Danielle watched her, her throat tightening. There was a war coming. A war against secrecy, against systems that thrived on silence, against the belief that some voices were just too small to matter. But Zaria's drawings were louder than any scream. And Danielle, she was just getting started. They tried to erase her. 3 days after filing the writ of habeas corpus, Danielle knew something was wrong. The silence wasn't normal. In the world of emergency filings, there was always noise, emails, countermotions, phone calls. But this time, nothing. No court dates, no return calls, not even a rejection. It was like the petition had been swallowed. And then came the call. Blocked number. Danielle picked up anyway. A flat, bureaucratic voice on the other end. "Your emergency guardianship over the minor Zaria Fields has been terminated. A revised clause overrides Article 10 as of 2 days ago." Danielle sat straight up. What revised clause? Standard update to ensure child protection protocol. The child has been retrieved and transferred into state care. Further inquiries must be submitted in writing. Click. The line went dead. Danielle froze. Her eyes moved to the guest room, where Zaria's giraffe still sat on the neatly folded cot. The room was empty. She called the daycare, Little Stars Learning Center, where Zaria had been attending under a temporary ID for safety. The woman on the line sounded nervous. Someone from Child Protective Services picked her up this morning. Said it was routine. Danielle gripped her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. They took her, without a court hearing, without notice. They changed the law behind her back. She didn't even wait to grab her coat. She was already halfway out the door. The CPS office was as sterile and cold as ever. Danielle stormed past the front desk, flashing her badge. I need to speak to whoever's in charge of Zaria Field's relocation. Now. A tall, sharply dressed woman appeared minutes later. Her nameplate read, Mrs. Henderson, Senior Supervisor. Ms. Miles, she said with a tight smile. Please follow me. Danielle was led into a small interview room. She didn't sit. You illegally removed a child under my emergency guardianship. Henderson stayed calm. There's been a policy update. Due to your conflict of interest as a legal advocate, you were found to be unfit for guardianship. The child, Emily Quinn, is in protective care now. Danielle flinched. You changed her name. Henderson folded her hands neatly. It's standard in high-risk removals. I want to know where she is. I'm afraid that's not possible. Danielle leaned over the table, her voice low and cold. You are actively hiding a child from her biological mother and legal advocate. You've broken the law, and I will burn your entire department to the ground if you don't. The door opened. A CPS guard stepped in. Henderson stood. This meeting is over, Ms. Miles. I suggest you leave before your actions become grounds for obstruction. Danielle's chest heaved as she walked out, but not before locking eyes with Henderson one last time. They buried Mara, she said, but I brought her back, and I'll find Zaria too. You can't hide what's already in the light. That night, Danielle sat at her kitchen table with her father. Zaria's drawings were spread before them. Bright crayon sketches that once filled the apartment with hope. Now they felt like clues in a kidnapping. They've erased her identity, Danielle whispered. Changed her name. Changed her records. She's not even in the system under Zaria anymore. Mr. Miles reached across the table and squeezed her hand. They're scared, he said. That means you're winning. She shook her head. Not yet. Her phone buzzed. A new email had arrived. No subject. No signature. Just one attached file. A voicemail recording. She pressed play. A woman's voice filled the room. Please, I'm not unstable. They took her. My baby. She's all I had. Danielle froze. The voice was clear, not manic. Steady, not delusional. Mara, she whispered. It was a recording from 4 years ago, before Mara was committed. A desperate plea that had been buried deep in CPS files. She enhanced the audio, adjusting frequencies to bring out background sounds. Typing. A voice in the background. Male. Cold. Mark her as delusional. We don't have the resources for another appeal. Danielle slammed her laptop shut. This wasn't just negligence. This was a cover-up. The next morning, Danielle returned to Street Olivian Psychiatric Center, this time with something more powerful than a court order. A journalist. Marcus Chen stood beside her in his gray coat, notebook ready, a tiny camera clipped to his buttonhole. He had one goal: expose the truth. I've got audio, Danielle said. I've got a paper trail. And I've got a whistleblower waiting. Let's get her out, Marcus said. But inside the hospital, Mara was gone. A nurse claimed she'd been transferred 2 weeks ago to a private care home on the east side called the Resting Place. They hadn't notified anyone. No signature, no authorization, just gone. Danielle didn't even wait for security clearance. She and Marcus drove across town and found the halfway house tucked behind an abandoned factory. It looked more like a holding cell than a place of healing. When Mara saw them, her hands began to tremble. "I thought they were coming for me," she said softly. "They said you abandoned the case." Danielle hugged her. "Never." Mara's eyes were sunken but alert. "They have her, don't they?" Danielle nodded. "But we're going to get her back." That night, back at her office, Danielle began to build something stronger than a lawsuit. A movement. She called in allies, civil rights lawyers, family court judges, caseworkers who had seen too much. She sent Marcus all the files. The audio, the policy revisions, the project assurance memo she'd uncovered, where the state literally called Zaria's neighborhood a pilot zone for family behavior mitigation. She had everything. Now she needed to go public. The story hit online first. The child they tried to erase. Zaria's story. Mara's voice. Danielle's fight. Then local news picked it up. Then state news. Then national headlines. Parents began sharing similar stories. Lawyers sent Danielle messages with new names, new children, new mothers. A pattern emerged, and at the center of every single case, Dr. Ellen Crane. Danielle brought the files to the courthouse in person. This time, she wasn't filing for temporary guardianship. She was filing for full reinstatement of Mara's maternal rights, the reversal of Zaria's custody transfer, and the criminal investigation of Dr. Ellen Crane and CPS Supervisor Henderson. The judge, an older man with a tired face and quiet eyes, read through the documents. "This is substantial," he said, "and dangerous." Danielle met his gaze. "She's a child, Your Honor. And she's not lost. She's been stolen." A court date was set, but CPS struck back first. Danielle arrived home one evening to find a legal notice taped to her door. She was under investigation. Allegation, misconduct, coercion of a psychiatric patient, interference with CPS protocol, unethical guardianship. Her law license was under review. And Zaria, still missing. Danielle sank into her couch, her breath shaky. For the first time, doubt crept in. Then her father handed her something. A crayon drawing. 3 stick figures. One wore a cape. Beneath it, written in Zaria's uneven handwriting, "Miss Danielle is my hero." Danielle closed her eyes and stood up. The girl who made the world listen. The courtroom was packed. Not just with lawyers and officials, but with journalists, students, teachers, mothers, and quiet strangers who had once been children like Zaria, erased by a system designed to forget them. Mara Fields sat quietly at the front beside Danielle, her fingers curled tightly around the worn yellow giraffe stuffed animal Zaria had once held through every storm. Her knees bounced with nerves. Her shoulders shook slightly with every breath. Danielle placed her hand gently over Mara's. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered. Across the aisle sat Dr. Ellen Crane, flanked by state attorneys and a defense team that looked like they charged $1,000 an hour just to breathe. Crane's face was calm, but her eyes betrayed something rare in her world. Fear. The judge, Honorable Naomi Cortez, entered the chamber. Her gavel struck once. Her expression was unreadable, but her presence filled the room like a tidal wave. "This hearing has been called to determine the unlawful separation of minor Zaria Fields, the wrongful commitment of Mara Fields, and the investigation into a statewide behavioral flagging program known as Project Assurance." She turned to Danielle. "You may begin." Danielle rose, calm and focused, her black suit crisp, her voice ringing with both precision and pain. "Your Honor, what you're about to hear is not just about one mother or one child. This is about hundreds of families targeted under the guise of public safety and mental health protection." She walked toward the jury box, holding up a drawing. This was made by a child after her removal from the system, after she was erased. She held it high. 3 figures holding hands, one labeled Mara, another me, and between them, Miss Danielle. She wasn't lost. She wasn't neglected. She wasn't unwanted. She was stolen. And her mother was buried beneath red tape and misdiagnosed to make sure no one would ever find her again. Danielle turned to Dr. Crane. By you. Crane didn't flinch. The CPS attorney rose, already flustered. Objection. This is emotional manipulation. Judge Cortez raised a hand. Overruled. Danielle nodded. She walked to the witness stand. I'd like to call my first witness, Calvin Moore. The janitor from Street Olivian entered quietly, wearing a pressed shirt and a humble tie. He spoke softly, but clearly. I was there when Mara Fields was admitted. I saw her talking about filing a complaint. She was smart. Too smart. The next day, she was sedated. For weeks. Did she seem mentally unfit to you? Danielle asked. Not even a little. He looked at the judge. She was a mother, trying to find her daughter. Danielle called her next witness. Dr. Sarah Chen, the respected independent psychiatrist who had evaluated Mara just weeks ago. She spoke with clinical precision. There is no evidence, past or present, that Mara Fields suffers from schizophrenia or any other form of psychosis. The original diagnosis is not just flawed, it's fabricated. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Danielle laid the trap. And who signed off on the original diagnosis? Dr. Chen didn't blink. Dr. Ellen Crane. It was Dr. Crane's turn to speak. She took the stand with forced dignity. But her mask began to slip the moment Danielle began her cross-examination. You claim Mara Fields was paranoid, but did you ever verify her claims of surveillance? I was following protocol. Her behavior indicated delusional patterns. Danielle pulled out printed photos. Photos of the hidden room found behind Lucia Ortega's apartment wall. Toys, clothes, a one-way mirror, the same items Mara had once described. You called her paranoid, but she was telling the truth. Crane's lip quivered. Danielle pressed harder. How many mothers did you diagnose in the same 3 neighborhoods, doctor? I don't recall. 17. Danielle slapped the documents down. 17. All black, all diagnosed with nearly identical language, all separated from their children. The room was dead silent. Judge Cortez leaned forward. Dr. Crane, how do you explain that? Crane's voice cracked. I trusted the system, the flagging protocols, the assessment algorithms. Danielle's voice was a whip. You created the algorithm. The final witness wasn't listed. Danielle requested a brief recess, then returned with a small girl wearing a yellow dress and her hair braided with purple beads. Zaria Fields. The moment she stepped into the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted. Everyone turned. Everyone watched. Zaria looked around, nervous, small, but then her eyes found Mara's. The tiniest smile crept across her face. She took the stand. The judge bent slightly, adjusting the microphone. Can you tell us your name, sweetheart? Zaria gripped the giraffe in her arms. My name is Zaria, she said softly, but they made me say Emily. Judge Cortez nodded. Do you know who this woman is? She pointed to Mara. Zaria didn't hesitate. She's my mommy. The courtroom held its breath. Do you want to live with her? Zaria turned to the judge. I never stopped wanting that. She turned to Danielle. She found my drawings. She found my mommy. The judge blinked quickly, hiding the emotion in her eyes. Danielle gave a soft nod, signaling the testimony was over. The child had spoken, and the whole world had heard her. When the judge returned to deliver her ruling, everyone stood. In reviewing all presented evidence, it is the opinion of this court that Zaria Fields was unlawfully removed from her biological mother. The initial psychiatric diagnosis used to justify this separation is invalid. Custody is hereby restored to Mara Fields. All associated records shall be amended to reflect the truth. The gavel struck once. The room erupted. But Mara didn't move. She was frozen, tears flooding her eyes, her hands shaking. Then Zaria ran forward and launched herself into her mother's arms. Mommy. And Mara, after 4 years of silence, of sedation, of being told she was crazy, sang. She rocked Zaria gently and began humming the giraffe song, the one only the two of them knew. Zaria joined in, their voices harmonizing through tears, through laughter, through the breaking of every chain the world had tried to wrap around them. In the months that followed, Danielle's inbox overflowed. Women, families, survivors. The Guardian Clause project expanded into a citywide advocacy program, then statewide, then national. Danielle no longer worked for a firm. She worked for justice. She and Mara co-led the nonprofit, offering legal aid, mental health evaluations, safe housing, and real protection. Zaria thrived. She joined art classes. She spoke at a school board meeting about kids who get forgotten. She never let go of that giraffe. The girl who had once been left to die in the snow became the face of a movement that changed everything. And the world listened.